Hey everybody, I'm Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor and a spiritual seeker. And today, because we are coming very close to Halloween and Samhain and All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day and Day of the Dead, I wanted to talk a little bit about witches because I think it's important that as Christians we have a conversation that is factual and not fear-mongering or misogynistic about it. So, take a listen. So 3 years ago on my sabbatical, my husband and I went to many places, including to Salem, Massachusetts. I thought it would be really fun and a nice little cute little town to go and look at the historical, just all the history of that area. And in the process, I decided I was going to educate myself about witches in general, like the history of witches, what happened, and what witches actually believe. And that's something that most Christians don't do. I sort of grew up, like many of you may have, with this belief that if there were witches, that they were bad, that they sort of were devil worshippers and they cast spells and curses and most of us don't know much about them. And if you were to ask, like, what's your belief about witches, people might pull out one of the couple verses in the Bible that are like, no sorcery, no witchcraft, bad, murmur. But most of us don't actually know anything about it, and we don't know the history of how it is we got to believe what we believe, and could you even actually define what a witch really is or what witchcraft actually is? And most of us, whatever we might say, would be wrong. So I decided I'd take it upon myself to actually educate myself, to read books and to watch videos. And what I learned was completely different from, like many things. It was completely different from what I thought I knew. So the first thing I want to do is start with the Bible. And yes, there are a couple phrases in the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, in which it sort of talks about sorcery and witchcraft not being a good thing. But what exactly are they talking about? Well, let's think about it. So in the Old Testament, one of the things that I want to point out right away is that the practice of like divination and the practice of like working with spirits and knowing things and doing magic was not foreign, and it also wasn't something that only bad people did. In fact, in the book of Genesis, I was just recently reading the story of Joseph, Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. When he becomes the right-hand man to Pharaoh and is helping with the 7 years of bumper crops and endless food that's on the way, his brothers come to get food, and he really recognizes them. And one of the ways he tries to distinguish if their character has changed, like if they've become good people, is that he has them bring his younger brother, Benjamin, and he hides his special cup. And in Benjamin's sack, and this becomes this whole thing, right, where he accuses Benjamin of stealing it. But here's what he says. He goes, "Do you not know this is my cup that I use for divination?" Oh, so Joseph used divination. But is it okay because he was maybe doing divination with God? Or was it okay because the culture? I don't know. And I've noticed this in the Old Testament that like there'll be great powers, that people will do, but if they're doing it within the confines of Israel because they're apparently doing it with Yahweh, therefore it's okay. So it made me think, like, was that their belief? They knew that some people had access to power, that some people could use power and do things that seems like magic, but it was really just a matter of making sure that you were working with the right powers, the right forces, that you were working with God rather than with like other entities. And you have to also realize that this may be a shocker, but in the time of the Old Testament, they did not have a belief in the devil. They really didn't. It doesn't come up. All the power that the Israelites were working with comes from God. And other people had maybe their own gods, but basically, It was God who was doing everything. And the understanding and the belief in the Satan, the devil, came much later. And in fact, the concept of the devil that we have today was developed more in like the Middle Ages and even later. And we project our modern understandings of the devil and witchcraft and everything that has been woven in the last 500 to 700 years for us. And we project that back on the Bible. And we do that all the time. It's kind of a normal, natural thing to do, but we really should be aware of when it's getting in the way of us actually reading things for what they are. So there's this story also in which King Saul goes to visit the witch of Endor. She could also be called the medium of Endor. Now, a medium is somebody who specifically has the ability to talk with spirits on the other side. There's many different ways that people can have power in the occult or magic or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of times that all freaks us out. But I have to tell you that, like, again, in the Bible, people use all of these exact same powers. It's just like there's a prejudice that if you're doing it for God, you're okay. And if you're not doing it, or you're from somewhere else, that you must be bad. But Saul has just made this decree that there can't be any sorcerers or anything like that. And then sure enough, just after that, Samuel's died and this battle's coming up and Saul wants to know what to do. So he disguises himself and he goes to the medium of Endor. And he asks her to bring up the spirit of Samuel from Sheol, the place of the dead, so he can ask him what to do, because Saul always asked Samuel, like, ask your God, what do you want me to do? He like never relied on his own connection to God or intuition. And she is a perfectly nice person. In fact, she just has this gift. She does what she's asked. She actually does it. She brings up the spirit of Samuel. Samuel's super pissed at Saul about it. And then afterwards, because Saul gets bad news from Samuel, the witch of Endor comforts him. And then when she recognizes him as King Saul, she's like, oh my gosh, you're the one who's like, could hurt me. Please don't. And she's like super nice to him. And he's like, I'll let it go this time and whatever. I don't know. He's the one who's dishonest. He's the one who's hiding and disguising himself and asking her to do this. She actually has a perfectly great character. So there's nothing that she did that was evil or bad or scary or dangerous. She simply had a gift and she used it for her king, even though he acted in ways that were not integritous at all. Now, again, there's like a few references in the New Testament that talk about this as well, but overall, this is not a huge theme in the Bible. And the big thing is what happens later. As Christianity comes to power, a lot of things start to happen that are really, in retrospect, hopefully we can acknowledge, are very destructive and awful. There's certain perspectives we had about the other and about the way things were supposed to be and what we were to believe that have proved to have been pretty bad. And by that I mean the power of the church wanting to control what people thought about God, having some pretty awful thoughts, like I think original sin is pretty bad, telling people that they're bad. The view of women as being property and the misogyny that is inherent in the patriarchal church has wreaked havoc. The way we have viewed the earth and the way we've disconnected ourselves from the earth and seen the earth as a resource we can do with as we want to, rather than as a creation of God that is sacred. And I want to tell you, in the early church, there were definitely people who had the belief that the earth was sacred, that bodies were sacred, that all matter was sacred, and we were here for a reason on earth, not to like escape hatch with Jesus into heaven, but rather to embody this life and embody this earth in a beautiful way, to learn good lessons, to grow in our compassion and our soul's intelligence while we're here on earth. In fact, Christianity sometimes mixed really well with some of the pagan roots, the pagan beliefs they found in other places. I just finished a gorgeous book about Celtic Christianity called Walala, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, by a wonderful Celtic writer. And in this beautiful book, he basically says that paganism, which honors the earth, is egalitarian in its view of men and women, sort of loves life and finds joy in the world and nature, initially meshed really well with Christianity because they saw Jesus as revealing sort of some of those truths that we had forgotten about the beauty and the balance and the harmony that is inherent in creation and the mixture of heaven and earth intertwined that we can often forget. But of course, the church, the patriarchal church, slowly encroached on these beliefs and said they were bad and sort of drove them out so that everybody had to have this joyless, hierarchical, belief. And a lot of times Christianity then would go to other lands, and any belief that wasn't part of the imperial church, the patriarchal church, was automatically wrong and squashed out. And that includes paganism. That also includes other places, any other religion, indigenous religions, any other person who was of spiritual power in these places was automatically condemned and seen as bad, because there's this perspective that Christians had, that they had the truth, that they had the singular access to God through Jesus, and anyone who had a different tradition or a different belief system was clearly inherently of the devil and bad, and therefore it was a Christian's duty to convert or kill. I mean, this is a horrible, horrible, horrible theology that's done terrible, terrible things. And so a lot of women of wisdom, women of power in these places, men of power, shamans, healers, witches, people of these pagan and indigenous beliefs were deeply harmed by the patriarchal church coming and assuming that they were all these sorcerers, witches, whatever, and not listening to them, not learning from them, just simply condemning them without any belief that maybe God was working through those people too, that maybe God is already in the places that we are going out to as well. But here's something I really want to talk about very much, because the modern concept that we have of witches and the witch burnings that happened in Europe came from a very particular place and time, okay? And a lot of what we believe now was not what was believed in the time of Jesus or the time when the Bible was written. It really began in about the 15th century. So in 1487, there were two monks who wrote this infamous book called the Malus Malarum. I apologize if I'm messing that up super, super bad. But it was the first handbook that really talked about witches and had all of these pictures. And it was juicy details about just how naughty these witches are and how bad they are. But it was very, very misogynistic and creepy and weird. And in fact, it was so bad that initially when they tried to get it published, nobody wanted anything to do with it. The church didn't want anything to do with it. But these two monks went on with it anyway, and they got it published. And as it started to spread in popularity and more people started to believe it, and more pastors started to preach about the dangers of these witches and what these women were doing, guess what happened? People were finding more witches, and they were starting to, burn them and throw them in the water and do all sorts of horrible things. Hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women, were killed between 15 and 1800 in Europe, accused of witchcraft. And here's the thing, is that these people were accused of having a pact with the devil. And a lot of these pagan people, these people who were doing this work, let's just say a church person would come up to them, a priest would come up and say, "What are you doing?" And they would say, "Oh, this is my practice, my herbs, my, working with in this way." And they'd say, "You're working with the devil." And they'd be like, "What are you talking about? I don't know what this devil is." "Nope, you're working with the devil, because if you're not specifically doing things under the church, under the male leadership, then you are definitely a witch working with the devil, and it's bad, and therefore we have to harm you. We have to make you stop, or we have to kill you." It's so obviously gross. It's so obviously controlling and misogynistic and horrible. And yet this belief perpetuated and gained steam for hundreds of years and made its way over to the United States. And of course, Salem, Massachusetts, we kind of know how that happened. So, like I said, I actually did some research, and there were a couple books that I found super duper helpful, which if you're interested in this, I highly recommend. The first one, which I loved, was called Waking the Witch. This is a wonderful book that does go through some of the history of why we believe what we believe about witches, but also talks about how when women are stepping into their own power, one of the things that patriarchy and misogyny does is accuses them of being a witch or a bitch, or like all of those really, really awful words. So you find words and you find ways to like shove a woman down, to shut her up and make her quiet so that she can't have her own power. And this is a great book too. Witches, Sluts, and Feminists. This is a pretty stark look at the language that is used against women and has been used against women, and the pictures that have been painted about women in a way that have demonized and degraded and dehumanized them. And so for us to talk about witches, we need to acknowledge that there has been an agenda of controlling women and harming women that is awful, and we really, really need to repent of that and stop that and acknowledge that that has a huge, huge influence on the way we talk about Wicca and witchcraft and paganism and everything. And then finally, I have this beautiful book, Living Wicca, which was the very first one that I ever read. And my friends, this was so gentle and beautiful. And Scott Cunningham is like a really huge name in the community. So he's a very authoritative person. But some of the things that I read in the book just made me sad that Christianity does not have this. That for so long, Christianity has been divorced from nature and seen it as this other and this thing. And to me, when I was reading about Wicca and paganism and witchcraft or whatever you want to call it, it really felt like this beautiful return to the earth, return to working with the earth and the energies of the earth, of acknowledging the sun and the energy of the moon in these cycles of life, of winter and fall and summer and spring, and animals, and just like gently working with the earth and the energy of the earth in life, to realize that we're not separate, but we're a part of all of that. And so doing like full moon rituals or new moon rituals and thinking about manifesting is simply working with the energy that's all around us, including with God or goddess, in a beautiful way to like make your life more full. And two more things that I learned, and I'm super simplifying, there's so much more I could talk about here, but basically there's no centralized person or group of people, and never has been, that says this is how you be a witch or this is how you do Wicca, right? There isn't anything like that. There's different maybe strands or schools of thought, but overall you get to do what you want. And there is that beautiful phrase, it says, do what you want, but harm ye none, which is beautiful. It's this permission slip to explore life, to have fun, to see what your power and energy can do, but don't harm people. And with that is this belief system of like any energy you send out, threefold comes back at you. So why would you ever use your energy and your power and your manifestation or whatever it is for ill if you believe that that's coming back to you threefold? And so what I've read in these books is a reclaiming of, here we go, is a reclaiming of power, a reclaiming of the word witch, a reclaiming of feminine power, and also clearing up to actually understand what people who claim to be witches really are and what they're not. They are not worshiping the devil. In fact, many of them don't necessarily believe there is a devil. That's what Christians believe in. They believe rather in working with the higher energies of God or goddess. And many have rotated toward goddess because God has been so destroyed by Christianity as a negative male entity of judgment and wrath and condemnation that a lot of witches and people who are in Wiccan and pagan religions would rather work with the feminine energy of the goddess because that feels a lot safer. So last thing I want to say is that on this All Hallows Eve, which is a holy day for many, many different traditions, it is a holy day for Christians because All Saints' Day is November 1st. It is also a holy day for, like I said, pagans and Wiccans, Samhain and many other traditions. There's Day of the Dead. And I just heard that it's Diwali as well, which is the festival of light over darkness in Hinduism, all on the same day. It's so beautiful. I love the intersection of different faiths and spiritualities and energies and understandings all playing with each other. It's so beautiful. So anyway, for wrapping this all up, I just like to say that on Halloween, I like to honor the witch because of the way that the witch has been used as a word to control women, to demonize and dehumanize and degrade women. And we need to stop with that. We just need to stop with it. And I don't care about the Bible verses in the Bible that, like the 3 or 4 that talk about sorcery and witchcraft, because I'm not convinced. We know exactly what they were talking about. And I know the damage that has been done today with Christianity and the legacy of Christianity on women and on witches and paganism and indigenous religions. And we need to have a completely different outlook. One that's based on actually learning and educating ourselves, talking with people of different belief systems, honoring different ways of being, and yes, learning from them. Because, as I said, the beautiful intertwining of Celtic religion in understanding that you can be a Christian and hold the most beautiful aspects of the original pagan belief systems of that country. This book was so beautiful to me, and it made me, again, like practically weep at the ways in which imperial Christianity in the West has twisted and denied our bodies and nature and women and sexuality and all sorts of things to be such awful, evil things. And it has wreaked havoc, and I'm done with it. I'm done with it. So I hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful, and happy Halloween, my dear friends. Bye-bye.